Let's go. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to all of you, those new faces, those that I've seen in the past. According to Jewish mystical thought, every face is new because every moment existence is renewed in a perpetual form. It's called, in the language in Hebrew, Hisavus B'chol Rega. One of the underlying fundamental principles that the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement in the 18th century, emphasized, which is the concept that existence, as we know it, is constantly being renewed. This isn't an old world. Every second is a dynamic existence. Now, before modern science, namely quantum mechanics and the atomic and subatomic level of physics was discovered, this may have sounded like some type of mumbo-jumbo or supernatural beliefs to say that the world is constantly dynamic and animate. Because most people would say, when people leave this room, basically the room is dead because there's no human beings left. So all you have is our bookcases, books, and tables and chairs and so on. And when there's life, means there's human life and so on. Today we understand that that's completely not true. There's no such thing as a dead universe. Even a completely seemingly inanimate state is brimming with pulsating energy all the time on subatomic levels and levels that we cannot visibly see or experience. The Baal Shem Tov takes it a step further and basically teaches that this energy isn't just brimming, but is constantly being refreshed and renewed from its source. Which, in a sense, if you were able to get in touch with that, really be with the solution to most of human problems and ailments, including boredom and monotony and looking for some high and for some excitement and novelty that so many of us are searching for, especially in our leisurely times when we have a lot of empty space and empty time in our lives. So just to describe it in a more personal sense, there's a famous story. It's one of my favorite stories with Rabbi Baal Shem Tov, with one of the tzaddikim, the righteous people of his time. His name is Mordechai Rappaport, who the Baal Shem Tov once sent on a mission. And he went off to a particular city, came back, mission accomplished. And the Baal Shem Tov wasn't just satisfied to hear that. He wanted to know all the details of how exactly he traveled, how did he reach the place, and so on, which seeming to be trivial and unnecessary information. Who really cares which way you've traveled? The job was done and that's that. But he insisted, so Rav Mordechai Rappaport began to describe, Rav Chaim Rappaport, I should correct myself, instead of Mordechai, Chaim Rappaport, began to describe the way he traveled, his journey, and so on. And Baal Shem was interested in every detail. He traveled on this road toward this city. Where did you reside? Where did you sleep over? He went to an inn. The next night, he said he stayed on the side of a road because there was nowhere to sleep. And then in the morning, again describing all the details. In the morning, he said he woke up, washed himself, said prayers, and then sat down to have a bite. After he finished his meal, he went over to a spring of water, a brook of water, and took a cup of water and made a blessing on it with his meal. And the Baal Shem Tov, suddenly his face lit up, this type of excitement. He'd wonder what's he so excited about. And he said to him, and this became the immortal words that, if you think about it, can change any person's life. The Baal Shem Tov said to him, the entire existence from the beginning of creation waited for this moment. This water was waiting from the beginning of time for you to come and make a blessing on it. This is essentially the theme of understanding that something is constantly, perpetually new. Now imagine you're able to have that attitude in your life. And I've traveled many places in the world. And I always think about the story wherever I go, because sometimes I'm in places that, I know many Jews walk down this path. But sometimes you come to places you don't think anyone was ever here. At least not a Jew like me. And it's not just a Jew. And you wonder, it's like when you walk down the path in a forest. Robert Frost put it in his famous poem, The Road Less Traveled, traveling in the woods, and he came to a fork in the road. So Yogi Berra said, you come to a fork in the road, then you take it. You know, that. But Robert Frost put it this way, he says, and he saw two roads converge in the wood. One that was very traveled on. Many people traveled on it. And the other one was the road less traveled on. And I took the road less traveled, and that has made all the difference. Now, what path would most of you take? I can tell you from my own little experience that whenever you ask, and I've asked many audiences, are there any conformists in the room? Nobody ever raises their hand. So basically there's 7 billion non-conformists on earth, and no one knows where the conformists are. Because obviously conformists don't like to say, hey, I'm a conformist, you know. There are some that acknowledge it at some point, whatever. They must have gone through life and that doesn't make a difference to them. Their pride has been lost. So none of us think we're conformists. But the fact of the matter is most people do not take the road less traveled on because it is uncomfortable, it's unknown, there's risks involved. That's why not everybody's a pioneer, even though everybody could be a pioneer. And what the Baal Shem Tov said in the story was exactly that. So when I travel to these places, I always think to myself, you know, here you're walking on a space. All of you will be going, let's say, this summer, traveling places, or even places that you go to on a constant basis. Maybe existence was waiting for you to come there and do some good deed to make a blessing. Waiting for you, specifically you, to come there and do something that no one has ever done but you. Imagine if you had that attitude all the time. There'd really be no room for, as I said, boredom, or like, what's the purpose of my life? I seem aimless and listless, and so on and so forth. So the concept of perpetual creation, if you really take it to the full conclusion, really is telling you that life is constantly alive. There's constant opportunities, constantly being renewed, waiting for you to come there and do something about it. It's a whole different way of looking at things. Instead of us just being so-called victims or followers or conformists, that we indeed are pioneers and we indeed have something unique about us, and existence is waiting for you to do something. And that's not meant to put a burden on each of us. On the contrary, it's meant to make you feel responsible, special, in a good way. Bishvili nivra olam, the Mishnah says. A person is responsible to say, the world was created for me, not out of arrogance, of responsibility. So that's just a little opening thought. It's not even the theme of this evening's discussion, but I'm sure it fits in as well. Because we're going to be talking about a mystic, as the topics of this class is to see through the eyes of a mystic. It's a pre-Tisha B'Av workshop. Now we know we're now in the 9 days, the saddest part of the calendar. I also want to dedicate the class to our good friend Gary Salvet, whose birthday is on Tisha B'Av. Yeah, together with Mashiach and a few other special individuals. Or maybe he's a potential Mashiach. Who knows? What do you think? You know, maybe. I know. Distant maybe. Okay. So in the 9 days, it's the saddest time of the calendar. As I've described many times, the Jewish calendar isn't just a time measure. It's like most of us, you know, a calendar for many people is just really just an imaginary way of keeping order in your life. But in Jewish calendar, actually sees time as being energy. And the calendar is really a journey through energy, through the flow of the year, with every cycle of a person's life being reflected and mirrored in the calendar. So just like we go through our ups and downs in life, the Jewish calendar, the Hebrew calendar, also has its ups and downs. Adar, for example, is an up. As the Talmud says, when Adar enters, we increase in joy. And Av is its so-called like alter ego, antithesis, Mishanichnas Av, Mamaytim B'Simcha. And the Talmud actually equates the two, which itself is a little surprising. Why would you bring the two together? Because it's all part of one cycle in life. In Judaism, there's no such thing as any type of isolated, fragmented event. We of myopic vision, a narrow vision where we only see the moment, we see frame after frame. But if you think about it, life is like a film that's constantly going through change. And if you step back and have a bird's eye view, you see life very differently than when you're going through it. You know, it was Kierkegaard that said that you can only understand your life backwards, but you have to live your life frontwards. Because when you see backwards, sometimes you suddenly realize that events that happened at the time seemed completely incomprehensible or even undesirable. And then it ended up becoming an opportunity. And that's how Jews always survived. We went through the harshest. No nation suffered as much. And yet we never were broken. We suffered, but we didn't become sufferers. Because we always understood the journey. When you understand life as a journey, it's a very different. Every experience is in the middle of, everything is on its way to another place. It's a whole different, it's exactly what I said before with the Baal Shem Tov. So actually that introduction does fit into this theme here. So when we look at the calendar and see the 9 days, on an ostensible level, okay, it's sad days. You look at the laws of mourning and grieving in these days, no weddings, no music, no leisure, things that you only do so-called the necessities. It's a form of like a shiva. Not with all the strict laws of sitting shiva, but we're mourning and grieving the destruction of the 2 temples and the other events that happened in this period, this 3 weeks, Bein HaMetzarim, the 5 sad events that happened on the 17th of Tammuz, which is the beginning of the dire straits of the Mitzarim, and 5 things that happened at the end of it, the bookends of the saddest period. And you could stop there and say, okay, fine. Something important for us to pause and remember the temple was destroyed, as we do by every wedding ceremony. We break a glass. Very similar. Remember Yerushalayim, remember Jerusalem, remember the temple, and so on. But, as I just said, if you look a little deeper at it, it's a lot more than just that. Why would we still be grieving 2,000 years? You know, Shiva, God forbid if anyone has to sit and mourn over a loved one, it's only 7 days. As a matter of fact, it's forbidden to sit more than 7 days. It's considered cruel. It's considered over-grieving, it's considered overindulgence, and not a facade, not a healing experience. So why here we're sitting Shiva almost 2,000 years? On Tisha B'Av, Mashiach comes, we won't have it, but in case Mashiach doesn't come by Sunday, so what will be the law? You'll sit Saturday evening right after Shabbos this year because it's pushed off because of Shabbos. Synagogues will dim their lights. The chairs will be placed down in a Shiva setting where you sit lower than just regular. People will take off their leather shoes. You know, as opposed to Yom Kippur, which is more of an elevated day when we are like angels. Now we become grievers. And it's a Shiva. It's literally like a grief. And we say the book of Lamentations, recite Eicha, which in a mournful tune, etc., etc. So why suddenly are we grieving something 2,000 years when 7 days is the limit, even over a personal loved one? You could sometimes say, skeptics and cynics will say, what's with these Jews indulging always indulging in sadness? They're killing us, they're still killing us, you know. It's thousands of years. On a humorous note, I was in a cafe once during 3 weeks, and next to my table were 2 young guys, and they asked the waitress, how come there's no music? So she said, because it's the 3 weeks. He says, what's the 3 weeks? So his friend says to him, you're a son of the rabbi. Don't you know what the 3 weeks are? No, what is it? He says, that's when the Babylonians destroyed the first temple. The Romans destroyed the second temple. So the guy says, I don't get involved in politics. You know? The Romans, the Babylonians, it's a long time ago. Doesn't want to get involved in politics. Okay. So why are we still consumed with politics that happened by nations that long ago don't exist? You know, we're still here. The Babylonians and the Romans are gone. What they say, Nietzsche said God is dead, God said Nietzsche is dead. You know, so they're all gone, we're here. So clearly there's something more going on here. In the 9 days, Tisha B'Av, it's more than just remembering catastrophic events. Because we Jews, even though it's true we remember our leaving Egypt, and we don't forget the Holocaust, but we've always looked at life as building. Our vengeance was always our children and our grandchildren. You ask any Holocaust survivor, what's our vengeance? We don't go blow up German cafes. There's no suicide bombings. There's no sitting and plotting against those that perpetrated the world's most bestial and inhumane acts against us, even though it makes our blood boil. Our revenge is very simple. Holocaust survivors will show you their photo albums of their children and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's our vengeance. So what's this consumption with the past and the grieving and the sadness and so on? So there's a lot of ways to answer that question, but I think one way, another interesting phenomenon was, as usual, Jews answer questions with questions. Nothing happens by accident. So when you look at these 9 days, there's something else that interesting that takes place during these 9 days. There's 2 yard sites, 2 significant yard sites during this 9 days. The anniversary of the passing of Aaron, the high priest, on Rosh Chodesh. The 9 days begins actually with his passing. His passing was, this year was, Rosh Chodesh was Friday? Last Friday, right. And 5 days later, the 5th of Av, which was yesterday, is the yard site of another great leader and Jewish leader, the holy Arizal, Isaac Luria. In the year Shin Lamed Beis, What would that be? 1572, I believe. What day in the week was it? He knows days. He even knows when the first Rosh Hashanah was. What day in the week? That everybody knows. It was a Friday, right? It's the only time Rosh Hashanah could be on Friday, actually. Yeah. So, right, the Holy Arizal on the 5th of Av. He passed away in Tzfat, in the holiest city of Tzfat. It's now the old cemetery there. People visit. You have still the Arizal's mikveh is there. It's a cold mikveh, a live spring, and his synagogues and so on. So nothing happens by accident. Why, of all time, do these people passed away in the 9 days? I've thought about it many times. And often, when you look in history, you'll see that whenever there's a challenge, God gives us a strength to overcome that challenge, which is also a very fundamental principle in Jewish thought, and that is Eina mevakesh ela lefi koichan. We're never asked to do something that we don't have the power to do. So if you see yourself struck or you meet some very deep setbacks or failures or losses, you have to know that with every challenge comes a pack of strength. Now, of course, the demoralization of anything that saddens us sometimes doesn't allow us to see our own strength, but that's simply our own shortcoming. The key is to know that there's always strength whenever you deal with a challenge. In the words of the Talmud, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is God, Magdim Refuah L'Maka. He precedes every illness with a cure. So when you have a challenge, you know there's somewhere a cure for it. There's no such thing as impossible. Simple, no such thing as impossible. So with that in mind, you'll find very often that when the Jews or people in general were faced with a difficult situation, somewhere was buried in there a strength that we have to uncover. So you have to say that Aaron, the high priest, and Arizal give us some type of strength that can help us deal and understand the 9 days in some more profound fashion and manner. Now it's interesting, you could say, well, just a coincidence? Well, here, think about this. Another coincidence, if you think of coincidences. Another sad time in the Jewish calendar, not as sad as the 9 days, is the 49 days of Sfir, Omer, between Passover and Shavuos, where we also, different customs, but generally it's considered a time of grieving as well because of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva that passed away in an epidemic because of not honoring each other. Le'nogu kavod zeh b'zeh. And right there you also have a yard site of an interesting individual, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, another sage and mystic, on Lag BaOmer, the 33rd of Omer. So when you start thinking about this, like, you know, that where every sad days there seems to be a yard site of somebody. What's unique about these individuals? And in one word, you'll see what's unique about them is they're unifying forces. So even though in Judaism everything is a unifying force, the whole Torah was given to bring peace to the world. Peace between husband and wife, peace between families, peace between communities, peace between nations. Yet there are individuals and historical events that actually have a particular power of unity. Now, the sadness of these days is very much connected to disunity. As we'll soon discuss psychologically, what's the difference between sadness and joy? When people are happy and joyous, one of the things you see is they're far more accepting of others. Because when you feel good about yourself, you welcome people. You'll even see, let's say you marry off a child or some other type of simcha, you'll be far more benevolent, compassionate, even to people that you may once have rejected. Now, I know there's some people who are petty and carry grudges and do so even in time of joy, but that may be because of their own deficiencies. But the nature of simcha is, as Maimonides actually rules, is that you want to celebrate with others. Which is why Yom Tov, which is primarily a time of joy, as opposed to, let's say, Shabbos, which is more a time of pleasure, even though they both overlap, they both have elements of both, that's why there's a real mitzvah of Warav Achnosas Archim, inviting guests, because Ein Simchas Kriyas, the Simcha, joy is very difficult to do alone. When you're happy, you want to celebrate, you want to call people, you want to invite people, you want to do it with others. It's the nature of I want to say the beast, because it's not the beast, the nature of the angel is that the nature of joy is to welcome, is to unite. And what's the nature of when you're not in joyous mode? Is isolation. What's one of the signature elements of any sad, depressing state is isolation. You feel you're alone. No one understands me. No one wants to be with me. Who wants to be? You feel isolated. No one can ever relate to me in this situation. Which explains why in Eicha, if you look at it, Jeremiah wrote the book of Lamentations as he witnessed and the destruction. So how does he open up the book of Lamentations? It's interesting how it opens up. You would think there were many tragedies that happened there. Number one was the Holy Temple was destroyed. The divine presence in the Holy of Holies, the holiest place on earth, was destroyed. Number two, many Jews were killed. Number three, they were exiled, dispersed. It was a horrible situation. And yet of all things that Jeremiah laments about and cries out about as he opens the book of Eicha, the opening, he says, Eicha Yoshva Badad. Woe. Eicha is like a word like woe or alas. No. Eicha. Woe that she sits alone. Yoshva Badad. She sits alone. Who's sitting alone? He doesn't even spell out who. He's referring to the city of Jerusalem. So you'd think, okay, it's a sad thing to see Jerusalem alone without its inhabitants. But let's be honest, isn't the killing of thousands and thousands of innocent people a far greater problem? Isn't the destruction of the temple a far greater problem? Why loneliness of all things? That seems to be a byproduct. Because you look at psychologically, you'll see, anyone in a situation where there's something negative happened, it's far worse the loneliness that you feel than the actual negative element. Imagine, no one should ever have any negative experience, but imagine something happens, but you know there are people with you to hold you up. There are people holding your hand. You know there are people who care about you. It's infinitely easier to get through a difficult moment when you know there are others with you. Because then you feel, I'm part of a whole. I don't want to remember negative things, but I remember when we sat Shiva for my father 10 years ago. Thinking back, it was brilliant. I realized the whiz of people, they could keeping you so busy, and actually you don't even want to see everybody, but they keep coming and coming. In a way, it's a very big buffer, because people are carrying you. It's almost like cushioning the shock, because you're so busy with them. It's not so much what they say, it's just the fact that there's people coming. It's like a rush hour. You constantly, like we were every night, my brothers and sisters, our siblings would sit down and say, okay, like we all felt we had our little booths in this so-called tragic carnival, and everybody coming over, going through your emotions and telling the same story, like, okay, every half hour you change the story, So it was like, felt you were on a roll. But, that's the gallows humor, so to speak. But what it really was, it's about when you know that someone's with you, far different. You ask many, many people who've been, God forbid, abused or hurt, traumatized. What's worse than the trauma is the silence, is the loneliness. Like people don't want to be near you, or you think they don't want to be near you. And the loneliness is far worse and destructive. Look, you go to a hospital, God forbid, and you see somebody not well, but they have visitors and guests and gifts and cards and balloons and whatever it is, flowers, and people coming. And then you see right next door a neighbor, no visitors, no guests. Now they both have the same illness. What is it? This isn't just a different scene. It actually affects people. When you know there's people who believe in you and want you and want you to get well, and you hear it, it strengthens your immune system. The fight in you is stronger. And this is proven. This is even medically. It's not some religious idea. No one comes to visit. What do you think happens? The demoralization sets in, the loneliness sets in, the willpower. You don't even want to fight. Why? For whom? For what? So Yirmiyahu identified the worst part of the whole thing. The tragedies that happened, he would describe later, and we know. But the deepest part was the loneliness, that you think you're alone, and there's no one there. And even God is forsaken. You'll see very many people, where is God? Where was God when I needed him most, you hear people say. Everybody forsake me, betrayed me, etc., etc. So essentially, joy is a unifier, and sadness is an isolator. And actually, indeed, the temple was destroyed, the second temple, due to what? Due to this divisiveness. Sinas chinam. We could say, what's the connection? Just because the people baselessly hated each other, why would the temple be destroyed? Because it's very simple. A parent, the most painful thing for a parent is to see their children not get along. The greatest simcha for a parent is to see children get along. God said, what do I need a temple? What kind of divine presence do you need from me when you can't even talk to each other? When you're judgmental, when you're hurting each other, you're destroying each other. So sinas chinam is intricately bound into the destruction of the temple. The idea that each person is self-absorbed, my interest, not your interest. Very similar to what happened to the students of Rabbi Akiva in the Omer. They didn't honor each other, for whatever good reason they may have had. And that is the source of destruction. There can be a unifying temple and a God's divine presence among a family that's divided and broken apart. So what's the antidote? The Magdim Refuah Lamaka. So God sent two forces, two yardzites in the 9 days, and both of them are unifying forces. Let's start with Aaron, the high priest. What was distinguished him among everything? So Hillel says in the Mishnah, right in the Pirkei Avot, in chapter 1, he says, Hillel says, you should be mitalmidah, havid mitalmidah, shall be from the students of Aaron. And what's Aaron? He doesn't talk about his priesthood, not about lighting the menorah. Oyev shalom v'reidev shalom. He loved peace and he pursued peace. Oyev abrius u'mekarven l'Torah. He loved every creature. Whereas the Tanya translates it, brius, he loved everyone, even if they had no other quality. The fact that they were created by God is already a quality. And it says that when he would go around and make peace between husband and wife, between enemies. And he would do so with all kinds of methods, even if it was necessary to somewhat tamper with reality. He would tell people, you know what that guy said about you? He said, what? The worst possible thing, because you thought he was an enemy. He would say, no, he said great things about you. And then he'd go to the other person and say the same thing. He made peace. He was a peacemaker, a unifier. To the extent, this is a real big statement, Moses is no one greater than Moses. Moses was also a unifier. He was a lover, brought Torah to the Jewish people, led them, united them. And yet, when Moses passes away, it says in the Torah that all the sons of Israel cried. And when Aaron passes away, it says, Vayuvka Kol, so all the Jews, all the children, all Israel cried. Now obviously everyone grieved when Moses passed away. But why does the Torah emphasize B'nai and not Kol? Why only the so-called, the only part of the Jewish people? So commentaries, the Medrash explains, Rashi cites it, because it was more felt by all people, because Aaron was actively involved in uniting them. So they felt it much more obviously, even though everyone felt Moses passing, but Moses was the king. Moses was more removed from the day-to-day affairs of families and so on. Aaron would mingle among the people, and that was his effort. So on Rosh Chodesh Av, as we enter the 9 days, Magdim Refuah Lamaka, God sends us a remember, you have Aaron with you. Even in the darkest moments, you have Aaron with you. You know, it's similar to the fact that when you read the Bible at the end of the chapter Genesis, after the chapter Vayechi, the end of the book of Genesis, so it says Vayosem Aaron b'Mitzrayim. It says that Jacob talks about his passing, his last days, and he summons Joseph and says to him, I want you to do me a favor. When I pass away, I don't want to remain here in Egypt, in this God-forsaken place. I want you to take me back to where my parents are, Ma'arat HaMachpelah in Hebron. A whole discussion that even though I didn't do that service to your mother, Rachel, that was for a reason, because Rachel, your mother, wanted to be on the road when the Jews actually would be exiled. Rachel mevakal banah, she would cry for her children. But the point I want to make here is that's what Jacob did. Why? One of the reasons he didn't want to become a shrine, because he was Joseph's father, and maybe the Egyptians would turn his grave into a shrine. But then when Joseph passes away, he does not give the same instruction to his brothers and to his family. He could have said the same thing. What am I staying here in Egypt for? Take me back to Israel. It doesn't belong in Egypt. And yet he says to them, no, take a vow that when you leave this place, when the Jews will be freed from Egypt, ultimately, you'll take my bones with you, which is what Moses does later, and takes it back, and Joseph was then interred in Shechem. But why didn't Joseph just learn this message from his father? He did want his grave to become a shrine. God forbid. And one of the answers given, I remember when the Rebbe said it in the year, it was 1990, and he said something very moving, that Joseph knew that the Jews now would remain in exile here for a long time. And by making them take the vow, and saying that you will ultimately leave here with my bones and return to Israel, was giving them the hope that even when it was the darkest moments in Egypt, they could always go and remember that here is Joseph with us, and we know there's a promise that he will return, and so will we. Why Jacob didn't remain? Because Jacob's role in language of the mystics of Chassidus belongs in Israel. He's a man of the holy worlds. Joseph was the one that was sent to Egypt. He became the first Jewish accountant in the house of Potiphar before you. But you have good lineage, yeah. Yeah, Cheshve Cheshbeinus. And then he became the first businessman. He turned Egypt into a superpower in dealing with the grain. So Joseph's role was in a way transforming Egypt. So he remained with the Jews to remind them and give them the strength that even in the darkest moments, in a sense like going to a ohel, going to the grave of a tzaddik in Golus. So some tzaddikim go to Israel, and that's their place. And some stay with us, with knowing that just as they will go back with us, so will we. It gives hope, it gives strength. So similarly, in the beginning of Av, when we enter this sad time, we're given Aaron's, the man of peace, the man of love, the one who united, the opposite of sinas chinam, of divisiveness. And then 5 days later, we're given another great man, great mystic. And as I titled this class because of that, because it was yesterday, to see through the eyes of a mystic, meaning the Arizal. Now, what was unique about the Arizal? And how can we look through his eyes a bit? Well, we're already doing it, because the things I've discussed here are based on Kabbalistic teachings that come from the Holy Arizal. He himself did not write, by the way, his teachings, even though we call them Kisvei Arizal, the writings of the Arizal. It's actually all written primarily by his student, Reb Chaim Vital. So the Arizal was a very mysterious phenomenon, actually, in Jewish history, maybe the most mysterious of them all. I don't know if you know the history, but I'll just give you briefly, since yesterday was his yahrzeit. He lived for only almost 38 years. He was a young man when he passed away. He was in the public eye, meaning known, only 1 year and 8 months. And yet in that 1 year and 8 months, he transformed Judaism. He was born in Jerusalem in the year it's 38, so Tuf Shin Lamed Beis, like, yeah, not Shin, Reish Tzadik Ches or something, Tzadik Dal. And he finally settled in Tzfat the last year and 8 months of his life. When he came there, Tzfat was not a barren land. Tzfat had maybe the most concentration of great leaders, more than any other place in history in one place, except maybe during the time of the Talmud. You had the Beis Yosef there, you had the Alshich there, you had the Ramak, you had, I can give you a list of 30, 40 great giants that were all there. And they all recognized Arizal, even though he was younger than many of them, as being what they called a divine, they called him Eliki, the divine, the godly Arizal. Now, why is this such a phenomenon? Let me tell you why. Because Jews never get along. You understand? Even great Jews. In the Talmud, you have Shammai, you have Hillel. So though they were friends technically, personally, they weren't personalized it, but their students argued about almost everything. Jews have very strong minds, and they argue. Here comes a man, the Arizal, who didn't just teach teachings. He revealed mystical teachings that were literally mind-blowing. I don't want to say it because it's disrespectful, but if someone came around and said things like that today, they'd probably lock him up. And yet here, all these giants, not ignorant people. He didn't come to an ignorant town and, legend passed like about Shabtai Tzvi, Lahavdil, and so on. Here was a man among giants who all suddenly recognized something completely beyond, and all within a period of 1 year and 8 months, which is almost like no time at all. There was no time-tested way of knowing. A young man in his early 30s, not 37, and they deferred to him. And he became a force that has shaped and changed so much of Jewish life. I don't know if you know this, but Friday night service, the first half of the service is basically based on the Arizal's teachings. The Mogen Avram, one of the great commentators on the Shulchan Aruch, takes things from the Arizal. He was a uniter. Now here's the thing. Sfardim, Ashkenazim, Chassidim and non-Chassidim, basically every segment of Jewish life, of Jewish community, all united around the Arizal. You don't have that around almost anybody that you can identify by name. For example, the Rambam was great, but he had his detractors that didn't agree with him. Absolutely not. And the same thing with other contemporaries. There was the Beis Yosef, the Sfardim had their greats, the Ashkenazim had theirs. There may have been mutual respect, but no one just simply was accepted as an authority across the board. The Arizal is one, another one is Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, whose yahrzeit is the 33rd of Omer. So there you go, another unifying force. But if you really think about it, there's a reason why. And that's what I want to explore further. And that is because mystics, by nature, are unifiers. What is the idea of Jewish mysticism? Jewish mysticism, going back to what I said at the beginning of this class, is seeing the forces beneath the surface that shape reality, that shape existence. When you look at the surface of things, so you see what you see. Like, for example, Talmud and Jewish law is not there to tell you what makes things tick. It tells you what are the rules, the laws that God wants you to follow, and analyzes these laws, whether it's the laws between man and man, in other words, humanitarian laws, or it's laws between man and God, as in the laws of prayer, kashrut, kosher, Shabbat, and so on. So if you look at those laws, it'll tell you the mechanics. Here's how you keep Shabbat, here's how you don't. But someone will ask you, what happens on the day of Shabbat? What makes it tick? What's the soul of it? I mentioned last week the story with the nightingale that I've shared many times. You know, that with the story with the woman in Santa Cruz, California. Just briefly, just tell the story because it captures this idea well. The nightingale comes to God and says, thank you for giving me such a beautiful voice. But I need something to protect myself from predators. I may be serenading in the night, perched on a branch, and will attract predators that want me for dinner. So God offers the bird a beak, a sharp beak, and the bird rejects it because it's not becoming for an elegant bird like me, a nose like that. Okay. So then God offers the bird a set of claws, and the bird inspects the merchandise and again rejects it for the same reason. And finally, God offers the bird wings. In Hebrew, kanafayim, wings. And the bird looks at the wings, never saw wings before, and says, I don't understand. You're the master of the universe, the designer of it all. Why are you giving me these 2 pieces of flesh? I have enough body weight to carry to try to escape my enemies. And of course, God responds to the bird, no, little bird, these are wings. When you use them, you'll learn to you can soar and fly away from all your enemies. When you look at Torah and mitzvahs on an ostensible level, on a surface level, it's a lot of obligation. Almost everything is regulated. Not almost everything is regulated. So you can think, who needs all this body weight? Okay, fine, some people grow up with it, tradition, obligation, guilt, whatever, superstition. You'll make a deal with God every year, Rosh Hashanah, so you'll do some things, stay on his good side, so to speak, and so on. Whether it's adult type affairs or juvenile affairs, everybody can analyze their own story. So that's the laws. But then someone will say, well, what do I need all this burden for? But then you discover that these laws are really more than laws. Mitzvahs come from the word connections. Connections is very different than commandments. Nobody likes to be commanded. Everybody wants to be connected. Mobile, social media, networking, who do you know thing. So when you hear that a mitzvah's connection is very intriguing. Command, commands. I have enough commands. This one commands me, that one's commanding me. Everyone wants to command. But a connection. You discover the mitzvahs are wings, and a wing can it adds more body weight, but a wing also can take you to places you can never reach on your own. That's a whole different story. So the way the Zohar puts it, the Zohar was authored by the Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, and the Zohar is the basis of the writings of the teachings of the Arizal. It says very clearly, the Torah has a body and a soul. Gufa daraisa, neshmasa daraisa. The body of Torah, the soul of Torah. Like everything in life has a body and a soul. You look at a book, the letters on the page are the body. The message, the sentiment, the idea, the spirit is the soul. Your body is sitting right now in its chair. or wherever you may be. Those that may be sitting in bubble baths right now and watching this in the comfort of your homes. I always like to say that because it might make somebody feel guilty. I know I can't see you, but one day, but the day will come where this will be a two-way street. Okay. Many people just want a one-way mirror, that type of, like what do they have in the police station? You only could see them, they can't see you. Yeah. But you never know, maybe I do see you, so. But the bubbles are covering them up, so don't worry about it. You have to have enough bubbles. So we're all sitting in our comfortable chairs, everybody's got their body. That's your body. But is that all of you? No. That's the visible part, that's the sensory part. We all know there's something going on inside. We can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it in the physical sense. It's suprasensory, but you sense it. Call it whatever you like, but one of the names for it is a soul. Okay? As a matter of fact, we have 5 names for soul. But that's not the discussion right now. So you have the soul, which is just like the letters on the page is the body. The message in the letters is the soul. If you look at musical notes, and you don't know what they mean, it looks like gibberish, a bunch of squiggles on a page. And then someone sits down at a piano or another instrument, and they start and play, and they say, where are you playing it from? I say, I'm reading these notes. You see magic. It's exactly the same thing. It's body weight to the eye of the beholder, or to the body looks at body and sees body, and the soul sees the music. The wings look like more weight, but they are actually really forces that can take you to places you can never reach on your own. So imagine a body without a soul is called a corpse. A soul without a body is a floater, is not concretized, it's not grounded. Judaism consists of fusion of body and soul, of matter and energy, if you want to put it in more physics terms. Okay, E equals mc squared. Einstein maybe gets the credit for it, but it actually happened at Sinai, where energy and matter were seen as one. That they're really just reversible forms of existence. That we, people of the, as I said, of the body, we see the matter. We don't see energy, but then you see it can be converted into energy. Water is the best example. Here's a body of water. You cool it, you freeze it, it becomes ice, solid. You heat it, it becomes gas, and you could keep reversing it many times if you have a controlled environment. The gas can be turned into, the vapor can be turned into liquid, the liquids be turned into ice, and vice versa. Essentially what happens with the seas and the rain and evaporation, etc., this cycle. So we have examples of it. Take a piece of wood, it may look like an inanimate piece of wood, put it into a fire, suddenly it becomes fuel. Observe a flame, and you see it happening right in front of your eyes. The fuel, the wick, and the flame. The flame is compared to the soul, the wick is compared to the body. Ner Hashem, nishmas Adam. Ner mitzvah v'torah or. These are just metaphors and verses all over. If you really look at it, the whole Torah is filled with these references. Light, the menorah, how it's lit, and all that. Essentially, the mission on our life is to take the material world and turn it into spiritual fuel. To take your body and the part of the world that was given to you, the food you eat, the work you do, the money you make, the physical things of your life, and turn it into spiritual energy. Reveal, redeem, and release the spiritual energy. What the Kabbalists, or specifically the Arizal, calls redeeming the sparks. Birur hanetzutzes. To redeem, to free the sparks that are trapped inside of existence. I mentioned before the story with Chaim Rappaport. You come to a place. You may think you're coming there for a business meeting or for vacation or for some other thing. The truth is God leads the footsteps of man, Hashem Mitzad Kananu, for you to go there to find a spark that was waiting for you from the beginning of time for you to free it. This is classic Arizal thinking. So everybody looks at it on the outside level. No, I'm here on vacation. I'm here for other reasons. And the Arizal will look through his eyes and say, no, that's the ostensible reason that God got you to get there, because if a little elf came to you and said, listen, you got to go to this and this place for spiritual growth, you say, I have no time. I have too busy schedule. So God figures out ways to get you to come there. You think, oh, business opportunity, great, I'm on the first plane. Or, vacation, great place. So you go for your so-called ulterior motives, and meanwhile you're there for a deeper reason, which is one of the reasons that you have to always look for the unexpected. Sometimes you're in a place not because what you planned The greatest things happen to you when you don't let human plans get in the way. They say in Yiddish, Gott tracht, a mensch tracht, Gott lacht. It's hard to translate that into English in a rhyming way. It means a man, there is actually a way, a man dispenses, what? What? A man plans and God laughs. But there's, I think, a word, someone figure out how to make it rhyme, some other word, I forgot what it is. If someone knows, please let me know. Why don't you Google it? Anyway, so when you go to a place, you look for the spontaneous. Many of us are so structured with our plans, sometimes you have to just let go and say, you know what, let me see something happen, the unexpected. And sometimes you end up having a conversation with someone that you didn't even expect to meet, and it can be more meaningful than the whole reason that you went there in the first place. This is how a mystic looks at it, how the Arizal looks. He always looks for the deeper causes behind things. It's like a scientist in a certain way. But it goes even further than that, because a scientist is more for curiosity, or understanding the laws of nature, manipulating them for some purpose, or to win an award. Here it's to change the world. Every opportunity is to change the world. So in that context, everything in life has a body and a soul, and through the eyes of the Arizal, you can look for the soul within everything. When you see the soul, it suddenly becomes wings. You suddenly hear the music. You see the art. Whereas opposed, if you look on the surface level, you only see the external. What's another factor that comes out of this? Connection, unity. You look at a tree, and you could say a beautiful tree. But if you see the soul of the tree, suddenly your soul can connect to the soul of the tree, and we come together. If human beings never figured out that wood can be shaped into a table or a piece of furniture, the wood would remain in the forest and you would remain. So essentially, soulful thinking, we'll call it that, helps unite things. You and I may have nothing in common because you do one type of work, I do another type of work. We just happen to bump into each other. But when we look at each other's soul, we suddenly intersect and we can see how we can each become greater. And think of a flame again. Two wicks don't join. Two flames don't just join, they become like one. When you bring two flames together, you can't even distinguish where the first flame ends and the second one begins. Because spirituality by nature is a uniter, and materialism by definition is a divider. No two people can sit in the same chair, but souls can join together completely. You could sit near somebody who you completely dislike, and you could be someone a million miles away that you love as if they're right near you. So when you talk about soul, soul transcends time and space. Materialism is defined by time and space, and therefore bound by time and space. So who better to have a yahrzeit in the 9 days, which is so much defined by divisiveness and loneliness, badad, than to have a force like the Arizal, which was seeing the inner forces behind everything. Just to capture in a story that I've mentioned many times at the end of Makkas in the Talmud, you see the same thing, the same story. And you'll see it's also connected to Lag BaOmer and so on and so forth. What's the story? So Rabbi Akiva, the greatest of all Talmudic sages, Kula Liba de Rabbi Akiva, he's considered the master of all the masters. His colleagues and him are gazing and looking at the Temple Mount. When you see the Temple Mount, you're supposed to rent your clothes, you're supposed to tear your clothes because it's like seeing destruction. And many times when I travel to Jerusalem, I always try to find the place that they looked at the Temple Mount. I don't know, I haven't found it yet. I've seen the Temple Mount from many directions. I always wonder if the Rabbi Akiva was standing right here. So they're looking at the Temple Mount after the destruction of the temple. And you can imagine these are people who sensed how terrible the destruction was. A place where the holiest of holies, think of the holiest place on earth, that was once not just glorified, considered the holiest place on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur. The holiest man on earth, the high priest, would enter there for a few moments to commune with God. And now, what did they see? A barren wilderness. You could still see the same wilderness. I mentioned it when I got back from Russia. Nothing's there. Less than nothing. So I'll go into details. But from a temple point of view, nothing is there. Not only nothing there, they saw shu'alim helchim bay. A shu'al in Hebrew is a fox. Fox were wandering there, which is always a sign of a wilderness. It means, so imagine suddenly in New York, fox are roaming the streets here. You can imagine what happened to this place. So the sages, his colleagues, Rabbi Akiva, began to cry. It's interesting, Shalom Holchenbeit pretty much defines what's been happening there for thousands of years till this day, right? Midreitzach. Yeah. From the place of the Holy of Holies, where the Kohen Gadol would enter, a fox suddenly runs out. Okay. So they started to cry. Who wouldn't cry when you see such a contrast? You know, imagine the most not just the most beautiful, the holiest, most sacred thing in your life, and suddenly you see not only nothing's left, complete wasteland. They began to cry. Rabbi Akiva's looking, as they are, and he begins to laugh. You know, it's one thing he didn't cry. He has more, I guess, presence of mind or whatever it is. But why is he laughing? What's the joke? You know, as I said, it's the saddest thing to see. So they each explain each other. The Talmud tells us they each explain. The colleagues say to Rabbi Akiva, we're crying for obvious reason. Look at the fulfillment, of tragic fulfillment of the terrible prophecies of what would happen. The people didn't behave, and this is what happened, the destruction. And Rabbi Akiva says, well, I also read the prophecies, and I see another prophecy in Zechariah that says that when you'll see barren land and a wasteland made out of the Temple Mount, you know it's a stepping stone to the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, even greater one. So just like the first half of the prophecy was fulfilled, the negative side, there'll be the second half will be fulfilled, the return. This is a discussion which return. The second temple was already destroyed. Obviously the return of the third temple, there are different ways to explain it, but the bottom line is he saw, where they saw destruction, he saw construction. So the big question, what's the difference? They're all great colleagues, sages. And Rabbi Akiva, no doubt, sat Shiva on Tisha B'Av. There's no way that on Tisha B'Av he was celebrating and dancing and laughing. Tisha B'Av is a sad day, there's halacha, Jewish laws, and even Rabbi Akiva followed them. So what did he see that they didn't see? Well, he saw things that a mystic would see, that even a great sage may not see. You know, ein l'dayim al she'ein avroyos. There's an expression. A judge has to judge by what he sees. They saw destruction. They were right. But there's a deeper story behind destruction. He saw the raising with a Z, the Seisa Manas Livnes. He saw the vision, a bigger picture. Why he saw it was because he himself went through challenges in his life. He was like a Baal Tshuva. Till age 40, he was completely not knowledgeable of Torah. Some say he was a convert. Some say he was a child of converts. His name Akiva symbolizes Akev, which is like the heel. Someone who's gone through difficult times sees in difficulties what others don't see. Most of us, and we should always be protected, if you never lost your innocence, if you've never seen anything negative, so when you see something negative, it's negative. That's it. There's nothing more to say. But someone who's gone through the fire and come out stronger, they don't see fire like others do. Because they're a survivor. And not only a survivor, they've learned to thrive and to grow through their pain. Rabbi Akiva saw that. And that's what the Arizal teaches. When we look through his eyes, you look at life, you could see one thing on one dimension, and you put on X-ray vision, and you see a whole different dimension. And it's not a contradiction. Where one person sees a negative, another person can see a positive. So this isn't just a consolation, it's also a new way of looking at everything in life. Like I said, you're looking at the soul or the body. If you look at the body of something, it has its rules. You look at the soul, you see a different picture. You see a bigger picture. You also have a sense of a bird's eye view that you have to see till the end of the story. The story is not over. So you literally can transform your whole life if you can look through the eyes of the Arizal, which is why he left us a real body of literature. Yes, when you read it literally without a teacher, most of it is very cryptic, but thank God we have today the teachings of Chassidus, and we have the teachings of his students and students of students who deciphered it for us, who helped us take these ideas and helped us apply it to our lives today. One of the great doctrines of the Arizal is Tzimtzum. I've discussed it a number of times. Tzimtzum Arishan. When you read it initially and you never heard about it before, it sounds very, very cryptic, very distant, very abstract. But if you think about it and understand its meaning, it's as relevant as it gets. We all have it in our lives. What does the Tzimtzum Arishan literally mean? It means a major quantum leap. We call it a major contraction. Tzimtzum means to contract, to conceal. But there's concealments where you conceal something, you diminish it, you conceal it to some extent. But imagine having a type of paradigm shift where a state of consciousness is completely and dramatically and radically, a radical leap, where something completely transformed. I'll give you an example. You have a glove in a hand, you see the glove and then you see the hand. Everyone understands that the hand is primary and the glove is a glove to the hand, right? What happens if someone turns it and reverses it and you stop seeing the hand and all you see is the glove? And you convince yourself that the glove is more important than the hand. That would be a pretty distorted version, right? Well, my friends, this is it's exactly how we see existence. We see reality, the material reality that is visible to our eyes. You wake up in the morning, no one has to remind you that you're hungry, that you're tired, that your body has all kinds of needs. Our spirituality is invisible to us. So we see spirituality, we see the divine, God, as a novelty, some type of something out there. This is reality. But the truth is the exact opposite. This is like the glove. This is like what the Arizal calls the klipa. Klipa means the husk. Imagine suddenly you convince yourself that the orange peel is more important than the fruit. But that's how it is when you look from the outside in. You look at the world, you look at what are my interests right now, what are my needs, and that you see the surface level. You can learn and be taught that there's something beneath the surface. So even though there's this big cliche that says don't judge a book by its cover, I've never met someone that doesn't. Everybody judges a book by its cover. I can tell you personally that, I remember as an author, that they spend millions of dollars to develop and design book covers. Because the book cover is more important than sometimes what it says inside. You ever see the packaging of something? Right? Apple packaging takes more time to build, they say, than the product. Because the package is what we are going to judge it by. Outside surface. You ever buy these things? You got a package, you start unpacking it, and then you get a little thing here. Say, why do they need such a big box for such a small thing? Because it makes an impression, you know. You feel it's important. Well, such quality, so many layers, you know. It's almost like in Madison Avenue, the cynics say it's not important what happened, it's important what people think happened. Right? Or as that woman, the mother, is rolling a carriage, and someone comes over and says, "What a beautiful baby." And she says, "That's nothing. You should see his picture." You know? And you ever see people? The event doesn't matter. Did you get a picture of it or not? The picture is more important than the event. Okay. I think you get the idea. The idea is we live in a very surface level, very superficial world. As profound as we may think we are, we're all subject to this. Guaranteed that somebody of fame, with name recognition, walks into this door now, that everybody knows is a Hollywood star. I guarantee you, as much as you're interested in what I have to say, I'm going to have to take a little break for everybody to watch this. That's how it is. We're affected by externals. No. And however, we can train ourselves to start appreciating. Now, I've met in my life people who externals meant nothing. My own teacher, Rebbe, was like that. Was not impressed by any external thing. It was only mattered what was inside. But that's a rare type of person, a person whose life sees things, he sees things from the inside out. So this great symptom is what the Arizal explained to explain how suddenly, how could such a inverse reality become so inverse that you think that the glove is more important than the hand? Would anyone in their right mind say that the hammer that you hold in your hand should tell your hand what to do, or your hand tells the hammer what to do? You say it must be insane if someone's going to say, I'm going to follow what the instrument is going to tell me what to do. The instrument is my tool. And yet, you tell me, who runs the show in your life? Does your body tell your soul where to go, or your soul tells your body where to go? Who's the captain of the ship? Is it your soul's interests? And just remind yourself of a moment of where you're completely obsessed with something, that even while you're obsessed and you know it's destructive and could cause great damage, you still can't stop yourself from doing it. And not only that, even after you get burned, you'll do it again. Where does that insanity come from? So the Talmud says, Ein adam ever avera, elim ken nichnas by ruach shtus. Person will not sin unless there's a moment of insanity. Why? Would any person in their right mind, for example, put their hand in fire? Of course not. Why would anyone put their hand in fire? If someone does, you have to say either they don't know it's fire, Or they don't know the fire can damage you. So we can behave in ways that is very destructive, but we don't see as destructive nature because we're blind. And how is that cosmic and collective blindness defined? That's called tzimtzum harish. So when you hear it that way, that tzimtzum becomes very much alive and relevant to our lives. We all have it every day, every second of our lives. That's one of the Arizal's contributions to understand reality. So it really makes you think about things in a very interesting, twisted way. Why? Ironically. This question I always repeat, people ask me very often, everyone asks this question. Again, no one should know of this. Someone dies, someone loves, a beloved one dies, and you ask the question, where does the soul go to after death, after 120 years? Who doesn't ask that question? Where does it go? Is it somewhere? Is it safe? Is it happy? Are they all right, these souls? And there's a $1 billion industry, a $1 million industry called seances and psychics that connect you to these souls, and people desperate are going to go, and everybody wants to know where that soul went. And after hearing this question a number of times in my years ago, I finally realized something bothered me about the question. Not that it's not a legitimate question, but still something. And then it hit me. It's exactly what we're discussing right now. And that's what I began answering. It sounds a little humorous, but funny, but I always say, 1 second. The whole question is based on a false premise. The premise is, I am where it's at, so I'm asking, where does the soul go to upon death? But who told you you're where it's at? How do you know you're where it's at? Maybe you're not where it's at. It's almost like an arrogant assumption. So let's take an imaginary dialogue between a refrigerator and electricity. It's imaginary. Okay? And the refrigerator says to the electricity, where do you go to when they pull the plug? And what do you think the electricity, of course, incredulously says? What kind of chutzpah is that? What do you mean where I go to? Where'd you come from? You're a little box they invented the last 100, 200 years. To be able to contain my electricity and energy, to refrigerate and cool, keep food fresh. And now you're convinced you're the center of the universe, and you're asking me where I went, where I go. I was here long before you were created, little box. And I just go back to where I always was, which was not confined in this little box of yours. Now anyone hears the answer, they say, of course, it makes total sense. Just because we see things from our little box doesn't mean that's reality. You stand on the ground or in a valley, and someone says to you, what does the horizon look like? You'll give one description. Then climb a mountain halfway. What does it look like now? No, another description. And then you're on top of the mountain, a third description. So which one's right? They're all right, but they have to be with one qualification, depending what perspective. When I stand on the ground, that's what I see. When I stand halfway up, that's what I see. And that acknowledgement of just knowing that everything is subjective based on your perspective is the difference between life and death, essentially. So from that perspective, then, okay, 1 second. So we have a little glimpse into things through the eyes of the refrigerator, and we know very little about electricity outside the refrigerator. Maybe we can surmise, we can speculate. Obviously, I'm not just talking about electricity, I'm talking about the soul. Just like we know very little about life before we were born, we know very little about life after we leave. So one leg of the journey is the box called the human body, and that's it. You're going to define reality based on your little box. I always tell the classic Chelm story that captures it so well. Chelm was this little town in Poland. Was it Poland? And where they say wise people lived, and then the neighbors, resentful, created this whole folklore of the Chelm stories. They have very many psychological lessons of the fools of Chelm. So here's about the farmer of Chelm. So Chelm was a small town, and the farmer Chelm obviously was even smaller. But it was his farm. So he knew every grain of sand. It was his baby. He inherited from his parents, his grandparents, great-grandparents, from time immemorial. One day he gets a visitor, a cousin, a distant cousin from a big city in the United States. Where are the big farms in the United States? Let's say, Iowa. I know Texas sounds bigger.
They're big there too.
Whatever. Okay, there you go. Okay. You're from there?
No, you know, as soon as you get to the Midwest, it's the breadbasket.
Okay.
You know, Texas, northern Texas.
So this visitor comes, and he gives him a royal tour of his Chelm farm, which doesn't take long, obviously. And they sit down to dinner, and he says, so what do you think, cousin, of my farm here in Chelm? He says, it's very nice and cute, but it's so tiny. And he gets taken aback, and he's all insulted. What do you mean tiny? How big is your farm back there in Texas? Whatever it is. Yeah. So how is he going to explain to a little shtetl, provincial farmer from Chelm, what a farm looks like in the United States? No. You know, thousands of acres. So he tries to find a point of reference, and he says, my farm, I'll tell you how, it takes me all day to travel with my tractor from one end of the farm to the next. All day. Okay. He thought the Chelm farmer would get it. So the Chelm farmer suddenly says to him, you know, with compassion and empathy, he says to the big town farmer, he says, don't feel bad, cousin. I once had a tractor just like that. Okay. So he's convinced that it's not the farm because he can't even fathom such a size. It's not like he was being malicious. If we passed out a questionnaire, how many of you are objective or subjective? How many of you are open-minded, narrow-minded, closed-minded? How many think people are going to check, I'm closed-minded, narrow-minded, subjective, blind, and all that? Like one guy once told me, you have blind spots, I asked him. He says, yes, but I know what they are. There you go. Okay. Like when the doctor that says to you, I'll tell you when you need a second opinion. You say to my friend, I need a second opinion because I don't trust you. You're going to tell me when I need a second opinion? Anyway, so the Chelm farmer was innocent and honest. The only one thing, his perspective was limited. We're all subjective. Our objectivity is all based on our perspective. Anything you say, you could say, from my perspective, that's how I understand it, from my experience. The Chelm farmer could not imagine a farm that large. So what could he imagine? That he once had an old shmata jalopy. It took him all day to crank it up to get it from here to here. So probably this farmer in Texas must have such an old shmata too. We all have our farms and we all have our boxes. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. What to be ashamed of is if you convince yourself that your box is not a box and that you see it all. We don't see it all. So one of the beautiful messages of these days is the 9 days. As sad as it is, it challenges your perspective. Because when things are going well, most of us do not change our way of thinking. Everything's going well. What's the problem? But suddenly you're in a constrained time called the Bein Hamtzarim. And then the 9 days even more so. And things are not, if you think about it, it's not a pleasant memories. It forces you to think out of the box, basically. And comes the Arizal and says, look at it with a bigger picture. There's a bigger picture going on here. It may look like, if you look from the box's perspective, from the body's perspective, it's a very small farm. It may look like a destruction. But if you look from the bigger perspective, you'll be able to smile like Rabbi Akiva did, because you see there's a bigger story unfolding. You may not see it right away, but the more you train yourself to look this way, the more you realize life is not what you think it is. If we had that attitude, we could get through anything. Now, of course, when you're in the middle of a traumatic situation, it's very difficult to say, oh, you know what, let me step back and look, because you're emotionally distraught. That's why we have to prepare in the years of plenty for the years of famine, so to speak. And I always thought about it. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams. 7 years of plenty, he says, then we'd be followed by 7 years of famine. The two dreams. The fat cows eating the skinny cow, the thin cows, and then the fat stalks eating the thin ones. And he interprets it 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. And because of that, wow, unbelievable interpretation. And then what should we do? His advice is you begin to stockpile and prepare. Brilliant Jew, make him Mishnah Lamelech, second in command. You always think about it. What's so brilliant about that? That seems common sense. If you thought that you knew in 7 years from now things are not going to be so good, of course you start saving now. So what was so brilliant about Joseph? You know what it was? executing the plan. Everybody always says, you know what, there's always tomorrow. Here, we have an accountant in the house, right? How hard is it to get people to commit to saving if you don't force saving? It's called forced saving. Why? Because if you do $100, let's say, put away $100 a month, and it's up to you, and you'll choose what day you're going to do it. One day comes, oh, today it's not so easy. Next month I'll put away 200. What happens then? Never happens. Procrastination, excuses. But when you force it, it becomes like something that's etched in stone. That was the chiddush. It wasn't just he saw, you think 7 years of plenty, it's going so well. Who says maybe the famine's not coming this time? That's how we always think. You never see, no one looks at the big picture. Joseph's wisdom was that he was able to have the discipline, that when it was plenty, he did really put away. And it basically transformed Egypt from a nothing to a superpower, the first superpower in history, because of the discipline of one man. So there's tremendous lessons that in life. You wait to hit rock bottom when things are not going well, once a storm strikes, you say, okay, I'm going to learn to swim now. It's a little late. When do you see the difference between strong trees and weak trees? Between strong ships and weak ships? Between good swimmers and bad swimmers? Not, you see them during a storm, but you never prepare during the storm. It's built beforehand that way. So when the day comes, you have the strength, you have the reinforcement. Anyone that says, I'll wait till a rainy day and that's when I'm going to start building my strengths, God bless you. I hope it could work. Very difficult. So it's when we have the wherewithal and the wisdom and the patience, that's when you have to be wise and fortify. That's why when you study Arizal's teachings, you study Hasidic thought, what it does is it gives you a new set of eyes, a new way of looking at life. Literally, a new way. What does that mean, new? Not a different world. You see the same world, but you see the soul of it, not just the body. You don't just see leaves on a tree. You don't just see a tree. You don't just see an apple. You see sparks. Physically, not so you see physically, but you understand everything is a spiritual opportunity. Reb Chaim Rappaport, the Rebbe Shem Tov taught him. You went on a road. You saw water coming from a brook, a spring of water. You made a blessing. Great. But the whole existence was waiting for you to do that. That's the way you begin to look at things. You meet people, and you see more possibilities than you would ever imagine. You see yourself with a new way. And I've mentioned this story a number of times. It's just a good example of this. Years ago, I was traveling to East Hampton for a Shabbos, for a Shabbaton. I stopped for gas at a gas station on the way somewhere, some hick town. After Long Island Expressway on the 27, what is it? Yeah. And a guy right near the gas station was a club. So there was a parking attendant already parking cars like for the festivities, Shabbos festivities for that. And he comes over to me, says to me, are you staying for the party? So I said, not for this party, I'm going to another party. And we begin to strike up a conversation. And he's like intrigued with me, he's asking me who I am. So I told him, I teach, I write. What do you write about? I told him spirituality, psychology. He says, you have an email list? Yeah. Here, put me on the list, send me what you write. Okay. I took it and I traveled on. I didn't forget the story, but it wasn't like, I came back to New York, back after Shabbos. I gave it to my office, we put him on a list, and he was getting emails. Little did I know whether he's reading it, not reading it, where he is even opening the mails. I didn't check. Maybe 5 years later, 4 years later, I don't remember the exact dates, I get an email from him. You probably don't remember me. I was a parking attendant, and you were there getting gas, all the details, and I gave you my email address. You probably didn't think I was Jewish, but I am. I have a pretty tragic life because my parents were both killed in a car accident when I was a baby, and I went from one home to another home, relatives, foster home, basically one nightmare after the next. And my life is a wreck, a mess. And but since you've been sending me these emails, I want you to know I never received a Jewish education, never went to Jewish schools, don't go to synagogue. But your emails have become, for me, my relationship with God, my whole Judaism. And he started listing everything. He says Hanukkah, Purim, Pesach, Shavuos. He mentioned everything because I write about these things. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, your email, I pray with it, I study it. That's become my anchor. And I just wanted you to know that. A pretty moving story. I remember I was very touched by it. I wrote back to him. We still stay in contact. And I realized something that exactly like the story with Reb Chaim Rappaport. I may have been going to East Hampton for who knows what reason. I was going to teach, actually, for good reasons. Wasn't going to just enjoy myself. But maybe the whole thing was just to meet this guy. After that, I became this, what's called email harvester. A harvester of emails, is that a way you could say it? Started, wherever I go, I always ask people for their emails, because I realized the likelihood for him to have come to New York to a class like this, most likely not. He lived who knows where. But an email, it's nothing. Press of a button. I don't even have to send a special email to him. It's part of a same email to so many people. And with that, it could change a person's life. So then you think about technology also in a new way. Why did God create technology? So we all think it's good for our connections, our social connections. We're posting whatever we're posting. Everybody's busy with whatever they're doing. It's entertainment. It keeps you busy. Maybe business. But there's a deeper reason that Arizal would say. The whole technology was created for us to be able to connect with each other that we could never have connected in such ways in the past. So for every email you write for some shtus, for some nonsense, maybe you should send 3 nice emails to somebody. And today it's no big thing. Take an idea that you don't even have to originate something. Just forward something that you received. How much does that take? And it's free, just for the record, as we all know. It's not even putting in an envelope with a stamp. So when you think of it that way, you look at life very differently. Everything is an opportunity for 2 people to connect, to make the world a little better in some way. For me to help you, you to help me. And I've been blessed to be in that type of life. I was trained to think that way. But the truth is, all of us, if you think about it, this idea resonates. Nobody would ever say, no, this is something that repulses me, this concept. It's a new way of looking at things. We're trained so much to be self-absorbed and take care of our own needs. We constantly told the message, if you don't take care of yourself, no one's going to take care of you. What do you think that does? Maybe you manage, but it creates a certain isolationism. Dog eats dog, where everything is about protecting ourselves and our interests. Whereas when you think from the Arizal's perspective, you look through his eyes, it's a whole different picture. We're here to complement each other in this large cosmic symphony called life. And each of us has a soul, and we have something unique to contribute, and we have to find other kindred spirits and see how we each can join in this musical, what do we call it? Symphony. And it's not just some nice poetic statement. It can change the way you look at everything in your life. Michelangelo said, when they asked him, how do you carve those beautiful angels in the marble? And he says, I see the marble, I see the angel trapped in the marble, and I carved and set it free. It's a whole different way of looking at things. It's not like, oh, how am I going to create a nice thing? You see it there already. It's a different set of eyes. Well, the Arizal and all the mystics, his students, and the ones that we had in our generation, I sat at the feet of one who was in direct lineage, received from his teacher, all the way to the Arizal. They looked at the world this way. They saw the angels everywhere, the music everywhere, the flowers. But it's trapped. It's trapped in marble. It's trapped in concrete. It's trapped in other substances. It's trapped in all the distractions and the forces that seduce us in their tentacles. And everybody can fill in the blanks how that manifests. We all got it. But there's something embedded within it all, waiting to emerge. Starting with your own soul, with your own potential, with your own possibilities. But it begins with you recognizing it, or at least looking for it. It's not going to emerge through any magic. If you don't have an attitude of you believing that it's there, who exactly is going to do it for you? So that's why this is a gift when you get a Arizal. Right here, smack in the 9 days, 4 days before Tisha B'Av. To tell us, look at life, even the destruction of life, even the Tisha B'Av of life, and see something deeper. And that's what Arizal did. What does he teach us? That we say Nachem on Tisha B'Av day, which we'll say after Mincha, by Mincha, Sunday afternoon. When the flames were rising to the highest, that's when the destruction was at its worst. We are consoled because Mashiach is born that moment. This is a teaching of the Arizal, based on the Medrash, but he emphasizes it. Because he sees in the darkest, he sees the greatest. That doesn't mean it's great yet. It just means it's concealed. but it means it's there, waiting to be released. It's a very different way of looking at life. Now, anyone that's ever gone through difficult, in some ways have had such eyes. We don't have to wait, God forbid, obviously, for trauma and tragedy. This way of looking at life can be also on very positive things. When you look at, like I said, technology. Technology is a tremendous tool today. But what do most of us use it for? Let's be honest. Anything that's really eternal, that's going to live on forever. That you could say, yeah, here's something I've really etched into my iPhone that my grandchildren one day are going to read it and say, wow, I had such a grandfather or grandmother. Let's be honest, we use it, as they say, junk in, junk out. For everything temporary in our lives, technology just makes it more amplified. All that's what technology does. It's neutral. It amplifies whatever you give it. You give it noise, it amplifies noise. You give it junk, it amplifies junk. You give it nonsense, it amplifies nonsense. You give it warmth, it amplifies warmth. With one press of a button, you can send a message to someone that can change their lives. So, in this period of time, this is how we look at things. And the Arizal, looking through the eyes of a mystic, is a different way of looking at existence. Now, it takes time to acclimate and train yourself to see things that way. It doesn't happen immediately, but it's doable. So, practical suggestion is you don't have to start, cold turkey, change everything. It's to begin slowly. You begin to look at some things in your life. One encounter a day. Like think, maybe what else was meant to be this encounter? I remember there was a businessman, pretty well-known businessman, came to this class. And he was buying my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, in bulk. Like he had boxes and kept on buying. I know my office told me that this guy keeps on buying. Then he met me. And he told me something interesting. He's known to be a pretty cutthroat type of businessman, shark, tough guy. And he's intimidating. And he says, someone gave him a copy of my book. He began to read it, Toward a Meaningful Life. And he liked it. Then he tried something. He decided, in the book there's a suggestion, how do you look at your business? Not just as a place to make money. See it also as an opportunity to meet people and maybe bring some kind words, something spiritual into each other's lives, which is antithetical for many to business. You do that on weekends, at night, at home, but not in your office. And I wrote there a suggestion the Rebbe had made that have a charity box on your desk. Of all places, your desk, your office desk, not only your home, which reminds you of the idea of giving, of being benevolent, and so on, in a place where not everybody is always benevolent. So he decided to try to do that. And then he took it a step further. He started giving people in his meetings a copy of my book. So he had a box, and he kept on refilling it and giving them the book. And he tells me it changed his whole business relationships for the better. Because suddenly this guy who's like so tough and everything added a dimension where they always start giving charity at the end of every meeting. And that's a 5 cents, 10 cents, it doesn't matter. But it was the spirit. And he says, suddenly where everybody was busy negotiating and trying to take as much they can from each other, they became a mode of giving. And he was giving them a book that was all about soulfulness and without any agenda. And he says it changed my entire climate. I can tell you now, I think my business was meant for this purpose, for me to become a giver. And I would never have thought of it that way. It was very interesting to hear because he wasn't talking as some type of spiritual mystic who decided to masquerade like a businessman, like a tzaddik nister thing, secret tzaddik who's masquerading. He was a real businessman. It was the other way around. And then he suddenly realized that you have to look at life and say, why are you in business in the first place? Now, most of us don't think that way. We think, okay, wait a second, I'm successful. Why not? This is what I do. This is how I make money. But that's not the way, ultimately, a Jew, and it's definitely not a soulful Jew, looks at things. There's always deeper purpose. Even to the seemingly mundane things we're involved in. Even business. Everything can be elevated. In other words, God is not just Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, and Shabbos in a synagogue, or the Kotel Maravi, or in the Holy of Holies. It's right here Wednesday night, and Tuesday night, and Tuesday day, 24/7. Everything has an opportunity for us to do and to transform in some way. Now, you begin, as I said, slowly, step by step, but not mechanically. You think of something and say, here's an experience, I'm going to look at it in a fresh way. And you'll see, such clarity breeds clarity, and you begin to look at more things that way. At some point, you start looking at everything that way. Is it going to be perfect? No, because we all have, of course, another side called the selfish voice, and there are going to be times we'll have setbacks, but the more you focus on that, the more you study, frankly, Hasidic thought, the more you acclimate yourself to look at things that way. And though it may not always serve perfectly, but you have a fighting chance because you have another perspective. Someone will tell you, here's the selfish perspective, and here's a soulful perspective. It's very different. It's not the same perspective. One just covers the surface level of things, and the other goes deeper and says, well, what's the deeper reason? What more is going on here in this interaction? And even sometimes unpleasant interaction. How often are we disturbed by someone insulting us, or we get angry or something like that? So what does the mystic say? Fine. Maybe something happened, it's not pleasant, but what's the deeper reason? Not an excuse for someone to hurt you. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the lessons afterwards. How do I grow through this? How many of us are still consumed with things that happen to us and we still play the victim? And how much does it block us from growing because we say, why did it happen to me? And look at that person thriving. I can't wait till they get there do. And it literally can consume you like a cancer. Or like some people like to put it, why are you giving free real estate to your enemy in your mind and your heart? So for freeing yourself of it sometimes requires, or not always requires, looking at, okay, I had this experience, what am I going to do with it? That person has their problems, not my problem. What am I going to do to look at the bigger picture? I'm not always saying it's easy to do, but that's the approach. And when you make that the standard, and you grow toward it, it becomes easier. It's like looking from the top of the mountain instead of looking from the bottom of the mountain. It's not always easy, as I said, but it's doable. It's easier to, of course, develop these skills when things are going well. It's harder once the storm strikes. Once you're in the middle of the hurricane, it's very difficult to find your bearings. So as we approach Tisha B'Av with all its so-called darker side, there's a profound light within it, and that light emerges actually the 15th of Av, as the Arizal also explains why it's the greatest, one of the greatest. There's no greater holiday than the 15th of Av comparable to Yom Kippur, because it's the revelation of the powerful energy that lies in the darkness of Tisha B'Av. So it's a tremendous dark, it's like a black hole. But a black hole is precisely black because of its power, not because of its weakness. Because the power of the gravitational pull is so intense it doesn't even allow light to escape. So when you see someone that's really in a dark place, to the point that they refuse to open up, you know there's a lot of power there. That's the good news. What do they say about the royal optimist? He comes into a barn that's filled with manure till the roof. And what does he say? Everyone says one thing. And he says, hey, there must be a pony in here somewhere. So it's a way to look at things. Positive, it's called optimistic, positive thinking. You see in everything that. I saw this with the Rebbe directly, how often he would look at something that everyone else saw as negative and turned it always into around, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to free the spark? How are you going to free that energy? And when you have that attitude, it changes everything. Attitude does matter. Not only does it matter, I would submit this, that your attitude to a challenge is more important than the challenge itself. What I mean by that is, you could have two people have to deal with the same impediment, the same difficulty, and one person solves it and one does not. How do you explain that? Because the attitude is the key. If you go with a negative attitude, then you have two things against you, the challenge and your attitude. You go with a positive attitude, then it's an attitude that is going to be able to say, okay, this is an impediment, how do we get around it? And you'll see this constantly. The people that grow are the ones that figure out how to get around it, and others say, oh, we're stuck. So that attitude is more important than the actual issue itself. Just like I said before, loneliness is worse than the trauma. Attitude is a positive. The negative attitude is worse than just the original reason why you had this negative attitude. So people will always say, okay, if that didn't happen to me, I wouldn't have that attitude. Well, the mystic would say, if you didn't have that attitude, maybe you'd be able to not happen to you, or you'd know what to do about it. It's a very big difference. The good swimmer and the bad swimmer, they may have the same challenges, but the good swimmer knows what to do about it. Navigate, know how to navigate. So may God bless us all these 9 days to, first of all, not have to face any difficulties, but when there are, be able to look with deeper eyes and see that there is soulfulness everywhere. And find people, if you can't see it yourself, find someone that can see it a little and help you get through it. Because sometimes the only way out is through, as they say. So, Tisha B'Av, Yahavchi Yom Meil L'Sasna L'Simcha L'Moedim Tevim, may these days be transformed. In other words, the inner joy and celebration should be revealed within the sadness of these days, both personally and collectively. Everybody should be blessed with much good health, what they call menuchas hanefesh, peace of mind and heart, and the attitude, the strength to and fortitude to be able to get through anything and know that you have everything you need to overcome any challenge that comes your way. Thank you. And okay, an announcement. First of all, before there won't be a live class next week. I'm going to be out of the city. I'll be but I will record a class, so there'll be one online broadcast. So physically we won't be here. The bodies won't be here, but the souls will. But you don't have to travel for that purpose. Okay, you could watch it. But I will return the week after, please God. And beyond that, Philip gives his class tomorrow night. If you haven't left me your email address, please do so. That way we can stay in touch. As I just said, emails is the key to forever connection. And until next week, everyone have a very pleasant week. A very, I would say, a transformative Tisha B'Av. You know how to stop it?